Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of Pennywise Pauper. I'm your host, Jake, and today we're battling with a super cool deck called Acid Trip. This is a white-blue deck that revolves around bouncing your own permanents for value. And it's a ton of fun to play. It's never quite been dominant online, but it has been growing in popularity recently, so you've probably seen this deck around. And I'm here to guide you through how to play it. Let's look at the pieces of this deck and see what it does. So let's start with the creatures. Most importantly, we have 4 Dreamstalker and 4 Core Skyfisher. They're both 2-mana creatures. They both say when it enters the battlefield, return a permanent you control to its owner's hand. Dreamstalker is a 1/5 and Core Skyfisher is a 2/3 flyer. Dreamstalker is obviously a lot better for blocking, and Skyfisher is better for beating down in the air. The way we take advantage of these creatures is that most of the permanents in our deck do not mind being returned to our hand, and in fact get better when we can return them to our hand. You can see that evident by our other 4 creatures here. They all do something when they enter the battlefield, so picking them up and getting to replay them is sometimes pretty good. We're playing 3 Lone Missionary. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 4 life. 1 Heliod's Pilgrim. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an aura card and put it in your hand. More on that later, you'll see why we're playing this card. 3 Seagate Oracle. When it enters the battlefield, you get to look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other on the bottom of your library. And 4 Muldrifter. When it enters the battlefield, you draw 2 cards. So we can pick up any of these cards for value and replay them and get their end of the battlefield effect again. Moving on, we see some more things that we want to pick up with our Dreamstalker and Core Skyfisher. At the bottom of this page, we have 4 Spreading Seas. It costs 1 in the blue to turn an enchanted land into an island, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So this is one of the draw engines in the deck. You enchant a land with this, you draw a card, and then you continually pick up the Spreading Seas whenever you need to pick up a permanent, and then you replay it. It's sort of, but not exactly like having an emblem that just says 1 in the blue, draw a card, and your opponent can't do anything about it. Unless they remove this enchantment itself, which is not easy to do, or remove the land it's on, which is also not easy to do. So it's a really easy way to pay the cost of returning permanents to your hand while also generating value and getting ahead on cards. Additionally, you can sometimes mess up your opponent's mana base. If they're not playing blue and they are playing 2 or 3 colors, it's possible to shut them off of a color or 2 and make it harder for them to cast spells. This also works well against bounce lands and Tron lands. Next we have Reality Acid, which contributes to the name of the deck. Even though it is the deck's namesake, we are only playing 3 of the 4 copies. It's 2 in a blue for an enchant permanent. Vanishing 3. It comes into play with 3 time counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove a time counter on it, and when the last is removed, sacrifice it. And when it leaves play, Enchanted Permanent's controller sacrifices it. So it's kind of like a Vindicate effect, but it takes 3 turns to work. You enchant something, and then 3 turns later, it comes off, and the thing goes away. However, with this deck, when we play a Core Skyfisher or a Dreamstalker, we pick up our Reality Acid. The thing dies immediately that it was enchanting, and we have a Reality Acid back in our hand. So it's almost like a Vindicate with buyback equal to 0, that you just get to keep reusing over and over again. So because both of our creatures that return things return the Reality Acid to our hand, we don't actually need multiple Reality Acid to go off. What we need is 1 Reality Acid and multiple creatures that bounce things. Also, this card is pretty bad when you don't draw one of those creatures, which is another reason you're not playing the full 4. At the top, we have more card advantage. So we have 4 copies of Preordain to find the important cards in our deck, and 3 copies of Momentary Blink, 1 in a white. Exile target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control, and it flashes back for 3 in a blue. You can use this to re-trigger your creature's end of the battlefield effects, and sometimes you can also dodge removal spells at the same time. Besides the Reality Acid, we also have some other removal spells in our deck. We have 4 Journey to Nowhere, which are good for being efficient, 1 Faith's Fetters, which is a nice tutor target for Heliod's Pilgrim whenever you need to gain some life, and 1 Serrated Arrows. Serrated Arrows is an artifact that enters the battlefield with 3 arrowhead counters, and you can tap and remove a counter from it to put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are no arrowhead counters on it, you have to sacrifice it. So once again, all of these things work well with the bounce creatures in our deck. If we need to reset a Journey to Nowhere and get a better creature with it than what is currently trapped underneath it, we can pick up a Journey and replay it. If we need to gain 4 life or move a Faith's Fetters around, we can do that with a bounce creature. Or if we want to use up all the counters on our Serrated Arrows, pick it up and replay it for more arrowhead counters, we can do that as well. Our mana base consists of 21 lands. Tranquil Cove and Kabir Crossroads are good for gaining life. They're often useful to pick up using your bounce creatures against aggro decks. 3 Azorius Chancery, which help generate card advantage. 2 Secluded Step that you can cycle away when you're done with your lands. And I also like the synergy between the bounce lands and the cycle lands. In that late game, you can play a bounce land and pick up a cycle land that you previously played to cycle it away. So even when you draw a land, you sometimes can turn that into a new card. In our sideboard, first we'll look at the anti-control cards. We have 2 Dispel, 2 Counterspell, which are good against decks that are trying to resolve things that are instant speed, trying to resolve counterspells against us, or just backbreaking spells are good to stop with the counterspell. 2 Relic of Progenitus to shut down flashback and graveyard decks. 2 Core Sanctifiers, which is good against opposing Journey to Nowhere and Oblivion Ring decks. It's also quite good versus Affinity. And lastly, there's 1 Stormbound Geist. This is extremely good versus decks like Blue-Black Control. If you can find a spot where they're tapped out and can't counter your spell, this will often demand 2 removal spells from them. Lastly, we have the anti-aggro sideboard cards. 2 Circle of Protection Red. It's useful against burn and red aggro decks, including Is It Blitz. 1 Lone Missionary, which is good against generic aggro decks. We also have 2 Holy Light. Elves is the list that is the most vulnerable to Holy Light, but there are other aggro decks that it's good against. And 1 more Serrated Arrows against the 1 Toughness creature decks. That's it for the deck, so let's get to the matches and see how they go.